for your patience. You can bring up the PowerPoint now.
Can you see this? Can everyone see the screen?
Yes, looks good.
Thank you. Nobody responded.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to the TransNet EMP Land Management 10th Cycle Grant Kickoff Meeting. My name is Lauren Lee. I'm a Regional Planner 1 here at Sandag, and I'm really glad that you all were able to make it. Sorry for the technical difficulties, and thank you so much for my team and Courtney switching gears. So we'll move to the next slide. So on the screen in front of you today is the agenda. At the end of presentation, we will leave about 30 minutes for open discussion. And I would like to remind you all to please have your microphones muted during the presentation. I will be the main contact for all implementation and daily activities here for the 10th Cycle Land Management Grants. Before we begin, I just want to provide some housekeeping today. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the Sandag website. We ask all attendees that if you have microphones muted and hold your questions until the end of the presentation. Or if you have any burning questions, please place them into the Zoom meeting chat at the end of the presentation. As I said before, we will set time for Q&A and for Sandag and SDMP staff to address any questions that were placed in the Zoom chat or any that you have at the end of the presentation. And additionally, we now will take a few minutes to introduce Sandag staff and SDMP staff. And for those who are newer, SDMP stands for the San Diego Management and Monitoring Program, which is a collective of USGS scientists funded by Sandag to prioritize and assist with science-based biological management and monitoring of conserved lands in San Diego. Now, I want to quickly take a few minutes to introduce our awesome staff who are here with me today. And I'll pass it over to Courtney. As many of you already know, you worked on Courtney with the current contract procurement to execute the cycle.
Thanks, Lauren. Also, thanks everyone for switching gears and happy Halloween. I don't normally dress like this for work. This is my costume. Thank you again. As a reminder, you should be still seeing some emails from me in the next few days about getting the last bits of contract procurement. And now I'll turn it over to Jenny.
Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Jenny Russo. I am the Grants Program Manager here at Sandag, and I'll be talking to you in a little bit. Courtney, I'm not sure who you want to have go next. Do you want me to give it back to you or Lauren?
Let's move on to Vanessa.
Perfect.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Vanessa, and I'm an associate marketing analyst here at Sandag and a member of our public affairs department. I look forward to seeing you guys all in a bit.
And let's turn it over to Eric now.
Hello, good afternoon. Eric Staples, Senior Analyst here at Sandag, and we will be overseeing the labor compliance portion of these grants.
And now we'll turn it over to SDMP.
Hey everyone, I'm Sarah McCutcheon. I'm the program coordinator for the San Diego Management and Monitoring Program, SDMMP, as Lauren explained earlier. Thanks.
I believe we are good to go. So I will turn it over to Courtney to go over the 10th cycle timeline.
Thank you. So as you know, guys know, we're in the final stretch. We're in the very last bit of it. Tomorrow, we are going to the Board of Directors on consent, asking for approval for the project rankings and funding recommendations for the 10th cycle. So we are crossing our fingers that everything will just be done first thing tomorrow morning. We expect then, once approved tomorrow, that grant agreements would be executed late November, early December. And then additionally, I wanted to point out similarly that process to those individual labor compliance meetings we had with everybody a couple months ago. We will also be hosting workshops for how to create SDMMP project pages, which you'll see those 2 dates on this timeline above. More details on what that will entail and like how to sign up will be given at the end of this presentation, but I just wanted to let you guys know that these are coming up as well. Other than that, I will turn it now over to Jenny.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. As I mentioned, I'm the grants program manager here at Sandag. My role is to oversee all 8 competitive programs that the agency has, including the EMP land management grant program. Let me first start. I want to congratulate all of you for being recommended to receive funding as a result of the 10th cycle call for projects. We are very excited about the projects that you are going to be delivering to our region. So thank you all. I'm here today to go over some of the high-level requirements that are in your grant agreements. For those of you who have received grants in the past, there are some changes from prior cycles, and I am going to note what those things are, just so you don't have to try and fish through and figure things out. So here we go. Next slide, please. So here are some general, whoops, go back one. Here are some general requirements that I want to share with you. There are no changes at all here from prior cycles, but it is still worthwhile to note some of these things. First thing is that no work can begin before the notice to proceed is issued. I realize the board will be considering the awards at their meeting tomorrow, but that is not your approval to begin work. So I know you're very excited to get work started, but please don't catch yourself ahead of that notice to proceed. What will happen, as Courtney mentioned earlier, once the board adopts the funding recommendations, we're going to go through and start the contracting process. That's anticipated to be completed in December. Once the grant agreement has been signed, both by you as the grantee and Sandag, then it will be considered fully executed. And the notice to proceed is usually issued shortly thereafter. It might be the same day or a day or two, somewhere in there. So to kind of give you an idea about timing. The next item on this list, which is really important, is that by utilizing public funds on your project is now a public works project, and it's subject to the prevailing wage requirements and other things similar to that are required by state law. As Courtney mentioned, you remember last month, we met with each of you individually to discuss your projects and going through your scopes of work to help identify the items that are subject to prevailing wage versus things that are not. Eric is here today. He's going to go through some high-level reminders of those just to keep that top of mind. So we'll go over through that later in the presentation. The next item relates to any agency or any entity other than you who will be working on the project. As a reminder, any contract that's valued at $10,000 or more requires a competitive selection process. If you're not going to be competitively procuring something and you are over the $10,000 figure, then approval of a sole source is required in advance of that contract work. You'll find some details for that in your grant agreement. Regarding project records, just remember that you need to retain all of your project records for 3 years after you receive your final payment from us. And then lastly, for those of you who are not public agencies, so not government entities, proof of insurance is required. The insurance requirements are listed in the grant agreement. I strongly encourage you to go back, pull those requirements out, and send them over to your insurance broker now. Sometimes having proper insurance and the documentation can take quite a bit of back and forth. If you ever hear from your agent, it's just this one page, I promise you it is never one page. So just keep that in mind and be aware. We do use a third-party system called MyCOI to collect and maintain all of the insurance records for all the contractors that Sandag uses. So be on the lookout for emails from MyCOI over the next month or so as we're kind of finalizing the contract and getting your materials, and throughout the life of your grant. We will be requesting insurance while we prepare your grant agreement, and the notice to proceed is not going to be issued until your insurance is received and everything is deemed in compliance with the contract. This is why I tell you, please go bring those requirements back today to whoever is preparing your insurance, whoever your agents are, and make sure that they know and they can start working on it. It does take some time to do that. And just maybe the last reminder is the grant agreement requires you to maintain insurance throughout the life of the grant, which means usually once a year, your broker is going to have to be sending a renewal saying, yes, I still have insurance. Even if it's the same policy and nothing has changed, we still need to have a record of that. So just be mindful. Next slide, please. So compliance information system. So Sandag monitors payments on all of its contractors to make sure they're being paid promptly. To do this, we use a system called a compliance information system, or CIS, to track each of our grantees, your contractors, and when and how much each of them is paid. Use of the system is mandatory for everybody working on the grant. Each month, you'll need to log into the system and verify the payment that was received by Sandag if we happen to send you one that month. You'll be verifying the amount that was received as well as the date that the payment, so when you saw it. Next, you'll list in the system whether you paid any of your contractors in that month and the dollar amount and the date that they were paid. And then lastly, your contractors will be asked to go into the system and verify just the dollar amount and the date that they received payment from you. Because Sandag does not have a contractual relationship with your contractors, your grant agreement does require that you ensure that they are verifying payments every month. This is really important. If they're not, you're going to hear about it from Eric and his group. They do monitor these periodically. So please make sure they go in. I promise it's not difficult. It's a couple of clicks to go in and verify payment. It's not a big hurdle. And if you need it, there is some technical assistance from staff here that are happy to help you with login or how to navigate the system, all those sorts of things. So please reach out if you should need any help with that. Next slide. As we all know, there are never enough funds to accomplish all the things that we want to do. This is especially true right now with inflation and gas prices and supply chain shortages and all those sorts of things. So our board adopted board policy number 35 many years ago, pre-existing today, to provide use it or lose it provisions for all of its competitive grant programs. The policy is available on our website, and there's also a link to it in your grant agreement. If your project has delays and needs a time extension, the policy is providing the requirements that have to be met in order to receive additional time for your project. Most importantly is the length of the extension that's needed. If it's an extension of 6 months or less, it can be processed at the staff level and only requires approval of our CEO. Extensions more than 6 months require approval either by the Regional Planning Committee or the Transportation Committee, depending on which schedule we can get on first. And please be aware that that 6-month timeframe is cumulative. So more than one extension is likely going to require approval by one of those policy committees. The policy also outlines the requirements that have to be met to request an extension, such as documenting the request in writing, including steps taken to avoid the delays, and what steps would be taken to ensure the project can be successfully completed in the time frame of the extension that you're requesting. So if you need a time extension at any point, Lauren's going to be there. She'll help you. And I'm also available to provide assistance should anybody run into this situation. My biggest piece of advice for all of you, and I will say this a couple of times in my little piece, please, please, please be as communicative as you can with us on your project. If there's ever something causing a delay, might cause a delay, or any sort of challenge that you're seeing or might see, please let us know as soon as you know about it, or as soon as it comes to you, or as soon as you think about it, so we can talk about whether there's something that's needed on the project. If you're going to need a time extension, sometimes we roll the dice and think we should be fine, and then we're not, and it becomes really hard to scramble and fix those sorts of things. So my number one takeaway I tell everybody who receives a grant from Sandag is please talk to us. We're here to help you. We want your projects to be successful. There's no gotcha here. So any type of issue that you're having on your project, please reach out so we can help you, especially as it's related to the time extensions. And in this program, the biggest, most frequent ones that we see are things like seasonal delays and drought. So pretty common to have them. Just be mindful of that. Next slide. Performance measures. So these are one of the new things that we have added to the program. The TransNet Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee, or ITOC, is our oversight board that has responsibility for the use of the TransNet funds. They are very, very interested in what the ITOC is paying for and where TransNet funds are going. They have requested that staff include performance measures across all of our grant programs, and performance measures are being implemented at each program as we implement a call for projects. So that's why you're just now seeing this. SDMMP staff, who Sarah is here on the call, they are going to be working with each of you over the coming weeks to develop the specific performance measures for your project. These are not going to be blanket where everyone does the same thing. Once these are developed, they will be included in your grant agreement, and you will be monitored to be sure that you are meeting your performance measures. On this slide, there are the first 3 examples of performance measures. The specific measure or measures, you could have more than one, applied to your project will be determined by your project scope of work. For example, if your project's going to include sensitive species, then you might be required to restore 90% of the species included in your grant. I know this might make some of you worry, but I want to reassure you that SDMMP is helping to establish these so they are realistic. So they'll take into account things like the success rate of certain species, so you aren't held to something that's not obtainable. For example, if a species only has like a 75% success rate, then that 90% factor would be applied to that number, not the initial amount that you might be working on. So be patient with us as we work with them, but I promise you, we are not trying to catch you into something that's not achievable. You're on my next slide. Perfect. This slide contains the other performance measure categories. Again, SDMMP will be working with you to determine the specific numbers that are going to be included on here. And lastly, I want to mention that you might have multiple measures applied to your project. So example, you might have invasive species removal and with fencing or signage. If that occurs, each performance measure would be monitored and reported on separately. So more information about the performance monitoring reports is going to be provided later on in this presentation. Next slide. Last item I want to cover is another new area that we've added this cycle regarding recovery plans. This is another area that's being added as a result of the ITOC oversight. If there's a grantee who does not comply with the requirements of their grant agreement, or if they can't meet their performance measures, a recovery plan is going to be triggered. So what is this? It's not a template, it's not a form, it's a plan, as you might imagine. So first thing that would happen is we would issue a notice to the grantee that requests the grantee complete a recovery plan. The recovery plan will be due to Sandag within 30 days of when we reach out and notify you to complete one. So you have a month to put one together. The recovery plan needs to include how the grantee intends to come in compliance with either the performance measures or the grant agreement terms or whatever the thing is that is presenting the problem. The grantee is going to provide in the plan the steps that it will take to ensure the compliance issues are corrected within a 3-month time frame. So you get to say, this is the issue, here is how I can come into compliance with it. So there is some uniqueness there. Obviously, it depends on the situation. And then once we agree on that recovery plan, you will be monitored to ensure you're making progress and completing the steps that are outlined in your plan. Doesn't make sense to do a plan if it's not going to be followed through. So if for some reason someone decides not to complete a recovery plan, I don't know why you wouldn't, or if you don't follow through with your plan, it could result in termination of the grant. So if you ever run into this situation, I hope that none of you do. These are not very common across all the programs, just in case you're worried about it. They're not a big deal, but they're just there in case something does come up. So I know it sounds awful, but again, we're here to help you. We want you to be successful. Please don't wait until there's a problem to involve us. The best piece of advice I have, again, is just to be as open and communicative as you can and ask for help when you need it. We've been doing this program. It's 10th cycle, 10 years plus or minus a few. So don't wait until you submit an invoice or a quarterly report or something like that to communicate with us if something's going on. So that's my big soapbox. I will leave it there and turn over to the next group. Thanks.
And we're moving on to Eric and the labor compliance team.
Thanks, guys. You can go to the next slide. So I know we have already met with you guys before. We're just going to do a high-level quick overview of everything we've talked about before, just to kind of ingrain it in your head, to just make sure that you're anybody performing prevailing wage work is registered with the DIR. They have to pay prevailing wages, and they have to follow, if applicable, the apprenticeship requirements too. So you have to maintain payrolls both in our LCP tracker system and in the DIR. And there are some consequences for not following these regulations, like restitution of wages, penalties, and the extreme case, debarment, but we haven't had to do that yet. Next slide, please. Okay, so all contractors at all tiers performing covered work must be registered with the DIR. Any contractor that's not registered will be subject to penalties. And like I mentioned before, it can be $100 a day up to $10,000, and that goes for multiple tiers too. All workers on the public works job must be paid prevailing wages, and any project valued at $30,000 or more must follow the DIR apprenticeship regulations. So if you or any of your subs do need to request an apprentice, you can utilize the DAS 140 form, which we can supply for you, or you can go on the DIR website with a quick Google search and download it too. Next slide, please. Okay, so all contractors that are subject to prevailing wage, you must maintain payroll records, like I said, and you must submit them to both the DIR and in our LCP tracker system as well. So we do have an escalation process here at Sandag, and violations, if they are found, can result in withhold of progress payments. Any non-compliance that's ongoing for a certain period of time, or depending on the severity of it, a public works complaint could be filed as well. So as Jenny mentioned earlier, also note that we do use an a web-based payment system, the CIS system. It's our compliance information system. So just make sure that you guys are utilizing that. And then if you have any questions with that, you can reach out to me as well. Next slide. Okay, so this is an important one. We went over it before, but we want to just reiterate this one, that nonprofit organizations are still subject to prevailing wage requirements when using their own forces, and your subcontractors will be too. So there are a couple of exemptions for people performing that covered work out there that they would not have to pay prevailing wages. The first would be a volunteer. And this means that they're performing work for a civic, charitable, or humanitarian reason, and they're not receiving any compensation whatsoever. So also, if you or your sub has a volunteer coordinator, they can be exempt as well. So this individual may be considered a volunteer coordinator, even if they perform some non-supervisory work on the project alongside the volunteers, as long as their primary responsibility is to oversee and supervise the volunteers, rather than to perform the non-supervisory work. And then additionally, the California Conservation Corps are exempt. I think locally, the one I know of is Urban Corp, but any registered California conservation code is exempt as well. And that is it for me. If you guys have any questions as the projects go on or before, feel free to reach out to myself or Madison. We can help you out.
Now we'll be moving on to Vanessa. We'll be sharing on PIO.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, I'm Vanessa Vasquez with Sandag Public Affairs. And as Lauren shared, I will be discussing project deliverables and media. Next slide, please. As a member of our Public Affairs Department, I support our PIO team, which is also known as our Public Information Office. And our department, we really handle public inquiries. We provide support at media events and help with manage marketing campaigns and also manage our social media channels. Our PIO team is often the first point of contact for the public, and we are also responsible for generating organic press. That means sharing the agency's good news with members of the media. We generate organic press, and that can be done through writing press releases, media advisories, hosting events, and press conferences. Our main goal is to inform the public of the wonderful environmental work that is being performed through these programs and really highlight the grantees. And another way we bring attention to the great work you're doing is to direct all media inquiries to Sandag PIO so we can collaborate on press. And as just to kind of echo Jenny's mentioned earlier, we also ask that you maintain regular communications with Sandag and mention us at every milestone of your project. So one, we can help bring attention to the great work you're doing and really make sure that it gets the visibility. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk social media. So as I previously mentioned, the PIO team is also responsible for managing Sandag's social media pages. If you don't already follow us, I certainly encourage you to do so. We've outlined the social handles for all the channels here. We have a very strong presence on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We post updates about key project and program milestones, reports, general information about Sandag, and also information about board actions. So here I kind of just included a couple snapshots of how really we do highlight the work you guys are doing and just as a visibility of what it looks like. So please continue to just keep us in the loop. Next slide, please. Okay, project media. On this slide, you see a good example of a before and after photo point. This example was supplied by the City of Chula Vista's Salt Creek Cactus Wren project. It's important when taking before and after photographs that they are taken at an established photo point, so the photographs are consistent and illustrative of the work performed. If you're asking yourself, what's a photo point? Don't worry. A photo point is an inexpensive technique to capture visual changes in the natural environment over time, just like a before and after example is shared on the above slide. We ask that grantees submit high quality, or also known as high resolution, before and after photographs when appropriate. These should be provided as like a separate file, like a PNG, a JPEG, sent via email, or we send it. And just as a reminder, these should be sent directly to the EMP team. From there, they will coordinate with my team and we'll find the best way to capitalize on the material. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is Sandag and TransNet signage guidelines. I just want to take a quick moment and go over promotional materials such as flyers, reports, media postings that are grant funded related should always contain the Sandag and TransNet logos and branding treatments. On the slide above, we provide an overview of the Sandag brand colors and their intended uses for materials, from our primary text colors, supporting, and accents. As you can see here, we provide a link. Please don't worry about writing this down. We'll share this at the end of today's meeting, which is also being recorded. So those will be shared with you guys in a follow-up. And also just as a reminder, we also encourage you to at any point to reach out with any logo, color questions. We understand sometimes not everybody's a designer and those questions come up, and we're definitely here to help you guys and guide you along the process. Also, we would ask that before any sort of promotional materials are printed or distributed, we really would appreciate if you would contact Sandag PIO for like a branding review, just to make sure everything looks great. Next slide. Okay, so here we have some logo examples. So these are included in that link I shared on the previous slide. And this is really kind of gives you an idea of how to pair the logos on what type of collateral background. So if there's a dark background or on white, these are our recommendations according to our brand guide, which will also be included with everything after today's meeting. So of course, at any point, if you have any questions when designing anything and applying these treatments, we're definitely here to help. Our contact information will be included at the last contact slide of the presentation, so please do not hesitate to reach out to us. And that pretty much concludes our Sandag Public Affairs PIO support. If there's any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I can answer them, or if there's anything follow up, certainly they can let our team know. Back over to you, Lauren. Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa. And now we'll move forward with SDMMP's presentation.
All right, hi everyone. Again, Sarah McCutcheon. I'm just going to give a brief overview of our project pages. As I think was mentioned on the timeline table, we will be hosting individual or small group workshops to actually go over how to create project pages. So, next slide. So if you are not familiar with our website, it is sdmmp.com. And from there, you have two ways that you can access our project pages. You can go to where the first red box is, go to portal, and there'll be a drop down, or you can go to the next red one that says view projects. Next slide. So from there, you'll get an option to filter by project type. So you can do species, vegetation communities, categories, or by preserve. And then I've just provided the links that will take you directly to the project page list if you're interested. Next slide. So here's just an example of a project page. This one's actually one of our projects at SDMMP, although probably many of you have contributed to this project. It's our rare plant one. So what you'll see is typically you have a title, a little box that says whether the project is in progress or in development, completed. There'll be a project description, and then those are, I guess, at minimum what you need for a project page, but we ask that you add, or for the land management grants, you'll be adding more information. So if your project has a specific protocol, you add that. Hopefully you add lots of pictures that were previously mentioned. We love having good pictures. Next slide. And then there's a section that has additional protocol or methods or documents. So basically any products that come out of your project, we really encourage you to add here. Many of what you will be adding are things that you will already be sending to the EMP team, to either Lauren or Courtney. Your quarterly, annual, final reports will go here, and then any other documents that may come up. And then there's an online map option that you can create a map, and then any other data files. Next slide. So this is an example of what your map may look like that will be included in your project page that you can create. So here's an example of one of the previous land management grants. I believe it is from Audubon. And so again, you have the title, description, nice photos. You list all the people that are involved, all the organizations that are involved. So there's many different categories that you can fill out for your project. Next slide. And then again, you have your documents that accompany this project, anything that may come up later on. We hope that this page will be a living page. So if your project has maybe some phases after your grant or anything like that, hopefully you'll continue to add whatever documents come out of that to this project page. It's just a nice way to show to the community what you have accomplished through this project. Next slide. So one of the things on the project page is we have one specifically for EMP land management grants, and this is just kind of the page I have where any information comes up. So when the grants were out for applications, I had updated it with information on how to apply and whatnot. But this kind of just houses any continuous information we have for land management grants. So one of the cool things that we have developed here is if you see the file and documents section, we have a list of all the awarded land management grants. So next slide, please. And it looks like this. So this is something that we created with Sandag, and it's just a running list of all past land management projects. It's really nice. It has brief description, what was funded, and then it has a link to the project page. So this exists on our website, it exists on Sandag's website. It's another way that people can access your project and see what has been done with that grant. Next slide. So that was just a brief overview. I will be hosting 2 workshops that everyone hopefully will be able to sign up for, and we'll go in depth on how to create a project page of your own. I believe someone can correct me that in order to receive the first quarter funding, you guys have to at least start your project page with me. And so we have this link that Lauren created to sign up. Please have whoever the main person that will be doing the project page attend the meeting. You're welcome to have anyone else attend that you would like, but have that main person sign up for one of these days. If one of these days does not work for you, just email me and hopefully we can find another day that works for a one-on-one time. But I'd prefer if people could sign up for this, and then we can all learn from different questions people have. I think that's it.
Thanks, Sarah. I just wanted to add one caveat,
Mhm.
was that it is a requirement per the grant agreement that that project pages need to be created prior to invoicing the first invoice, and then project pages must be maintained throughout the entire project in order to be continuing to receive reimbursement. So just reiterating, if this is a very important concept to the project, so please make sure to sign up for those workshops.
Yeah, any documents that you send to Lauren or Courtney, please add them to this page, or any photos that they could send out for media information, add to the page. So yeah, thanks, Courtney.
Well, hello, everyone, and thank you to Sarah and our SEMP staff and Sandag staff for their presentations. Now we will be moving on to the meat of this presentation, which will be where I go over the daily activities and requirements over the progression of the grant period. Next slide, please. So in the following slides, we're going to be going through the fiscal schedule, the TransNet invoice template, matching funds, performance measures, such as Jenny has mentioned previously, which is very unique for the cycle, and we'll get that more into detail later. And then as well as monitoring items, such as the quarterly, annual, and final reports, as well as the state of preserve Excel. All right, go next slide. Thanks. And as a reminder, all billing is on a fiscal quarter schedule, not a calendar year schedule. So please see the chart on the slide to see the differences. All reporting and billing material is due 3 weeks after each end of the fiscal quarter, which lands on the 21st of the following month. Please remember, if no work was performed, you must notify us that billing or work was performed for that quarter or not. Additionally, I want to stress the importance of submitting invoices timely, because we are required to provide the Independent Tax Oversight Committee, Transportation Committee, and Regional Planning Committee quarterly status updates on the progress of all of the projects for all of our cycles. If there are issues with communication, invoicing, or timeliness, Sandag is required to place that project on a watch list and report that to the committees. Grantees are then required to be in attendance to said committees and to provide rationale for why their problems are being experienced and why that is delaying the project. So please work with us. Please give us plenty of time. And if you are having issues, we are here for you, and we really want to make these projects successful. So if you let us know well in advance, we can also work with you for any issues that might arise. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. And as a reminder, the following, we will be going through all deliverables for both the threat reduction stewardship grants and the species and habitat recovery grants. As many of you have noticed, under the threat reduction stewardship grants, annual reports are not required since they must be completed within 18 months. Next slide, please. Please see on this slide the corresponding TransNet invoice, TransNet templates for threat reduction stewardship and for species and habitat recovery. Something you will hear me say a couple times during this presentation is please do not alter any of these templates. Please read all of the instructions and reach out if you have questions ahead of the submission of the quarter billing. These templates have been specifically designed for you all to keep track and monitoring accurate. It makes my life easier and it will make all of yours easier when we're on the same page and that there's no discrepancies when billing comes around. Additionally, for the species habitat and recovery, remember that your Exhibit B or project budget will determine how much proportionate matching funds you will need for each year. So make sure to keep a note on those in order to avoid withholds and to keep track with your project schedule. In the next slide, I'll go into this in more detail. As I mentioned earlier, if your project has matching funds, please be aware that if a grantee does not provide the proportionate amount of matching funds, SANDAG will reduce the amount of payment to the grantee. So that reimbursement amount provided by SANDAG matches the apportioned amount of matching funds provided by the grantee. This language on the slide was pulled directly from the grant agreement. This tracking of the matching funds is tracked by this Excel sheet, as you can see. Please make sure that each quarter that the appropriate amount of matching funds will be used. And you can front load more in the year to reduce the probability of a withhold, or if you see an issue arising later on that would prevent work, such as drought or weather. But that is not a requirement. So just as mentioned before, just communicate early on and we can settle or answer any of your questions that might come up. Next slide, please. And then something that is very different this cycle is the tracking and monitoring of performance measures that will be used to track the percentage complete and monitoring sustained project longevity. Essentially, do what you said you were promised to do. SANDAG will utilize the SANDAG performance measures to document the compliance with the project. And grantees will be measured against their performance measures during the term of the project. More details on the project performance measures and grant recovery plans are outlined in the call for projects and grant agreement, which you will receive in accompanying with the notice to proceed and grant agreements. And as Jenny mentioned, the performance measures have been created for each project and will be used to measure the success of the project's goals and objectives. Additionally, we'll be also using a monitoring checklist at the very end of the project, which will be used to evaluate the success of the project. Next slide, please. With the requirements that all photos need to be separate files, please use the We Send It transfer file, which you're able to send large files during the quarterly billing submission. Please use the specific SANDAG We Send It link, which will be provided to you with all the materials that will accompany with the grant agreement. It is important to note that obviously when you're submitting your invoices with your backup, that doesn't need to be submitted to the SDMME project page, but all of your deliverables such as final reports, quarterly reports, and photos, that's pretty much what we want in the SDMMP. And those details can be also found in the grant agreement. And also to add, all media deliverables such as photos, videos, and media need to be submitted as separate files. And that all of those flyers, reports, and media posters that are grant related should contain the SANDAG and TransNet logos and branding, as Vanessa mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So as you already know, your quarterly progress report is required for any payment for that quarter. Remember, this is where you should discuss and include photos and videos. The file types are listed on the slide. Any issues to note for the quarter, GIS data and maps. And this is also where you would, before submitting, your submission of quarterly billing, this is where you would put you would put this quarterly report into the SDMMP project pages, as well as this has a section of the project performance measures. Next slide, please. So moving on to annual reports. As a reminder, this is also where you will include photos, maps, GIS data, annual conclusions. You will also add this to your SDMMP project page. And this is also where you will copy your project performance measures section from the quarterly report and put it into this one. Remember, all of these templates have been specifically designed for these different deliverables and should not be altered at all. But if you do have technical difficulties, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. I would advise reaching out to me sooner than later, just so I can give time to give you the attention and communicate that to you as needed. And also a reminder, annual reports are only required for species and habitat recovery grants. Next slide, please. And for the final report, remember they are required for all grantees and must be added to the SMB project page before final payment is released. And this is a very important step in the closeout of the project, which obviously is not very soon, but just to be aware. And this template is very similar to an annual report, but it has additional sections. So please make sure to refer to this template and use this template, not the annual or the quarterly report. Next slide, please. And as previously discussed by SDMP, we have the state of preserve monitoring, which is a critical part to help support the data collection for SDMP's state of preserve. This section is required for annual reports and final reports. SDMP and SANDAG will be collecting specific data from each project in order to update the status of the regional preserve system in Western San Diego County. Information collected will become available on SDMP's dashboard. Now I'm finished with going over the activities and daily deliverables. And as mentioned before, these are all of the important contacts for the successful project management. And as a final reminder, all of this material will be provided to you after this meeting, accompanied with your grant agreement and notice to proceed. This PowerPoint and post recording of the meeting will be posted after the meeting to the SANDAG website. So please take a look, but these will be your important contacts. And again, I want to give a big hand to our staff and SDMP for working so diligently. And as well, thank you so much for your patience with this technical difficulty and for everyone presenting today. Now we will move into questions where we will first answer all the Zoom chat questions. I don't see any at the moment. That might be a technical difficulty, but if we do have any hands, please raise your hand now if you have any questions. And I will turn it over to Courtney to let me know who those people are.
Perfect. Kathy, you are first, and I believe I just gave you access to talk. But it still looks like your microphone's muted. Oh, okay. Connie, I just gave you permissions to talk. Connie, it says your microphone's unmuted, but we can't hear you. Oh, there's two of you.
Yes, I'm sorry. There are two of me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, okay. What's the best way to handle, since we submitted the proposal, there are likely to be, and we know that there may be increase in costs for labor and materials. So which can certainly affect our deliverables as far as, a specific example is fencing and the footage and fencing. So what's the best way to handle this now? I know we're approving some of those attachments, and maybe we could talk about this offline, but we just want to make sure that in that instance, we can pivot if we need to, but is there like a change order process, or if we get a quote from a fencing contractor and it's gone up 100%, we clearly can't complete that deliverable in the way we'd like to. So
Absolutely. That was a fantastic question, especially since Jenny even specifically mentioned the world's changing fast. Yes. So at that time, if we get to that point and we're moving through the project progress, and we get to that point and we realize, oh, we have to change this, there's no possible or feasible way, back to please communicate with us. We would then go about looking into an amendment to the scope of work, as long as it's accomplishing the goal of benefiting the MSP species and its habitat, and the change makes sense, which for the reason, the example that you gave, that would be an allowable change. So we would be able to handle that at that time.
Okay, great. Thank you. Because we don't have quotes yet, but we've gotten word. We have put some feelers out there and have gotten word, particularly with the prevailing wages, that it's gone up. So
Perfect.
okay, I guess as far as then submitting what you need from us for those exhibits, is it fine for us to leave it as is and then just revisit this because we don't know yet?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
Yes,
Great.
because we can't foresee, if you're, doing surveying and then, you get the quote a year later, things can change in that time frame.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mark Berninger, I just gave you permissions to speak.
All right. Hey, can you hear me, Courtney?
Yes, Mark, thank you.
Yeah. So I noticed on one of the slides that one of the requirements for the RFP was any contracts over $10,000 must go out to multiple bidders or be disseminated. Is that and that is different than the city of San Diego's requirements? Is there obviously we'd follow these requirements, but are there any other requirements for the RFP and how we would go about hiring those contractors?
I'll take that.
I was going to throw it to you anyway.
Yeah, so the 10,000 is our floor. If the city has a higher value than that, the 10,000 is the minimum. If your value is lower, you have to comply with our 10,000. That's the bare minimum basically for competitive stuff. That's really the only requirement we have specifically spelled out. Obviously, cities are the same as us. You have to follow public contract code and all those sorts of things. So we lean on you for your procedures and things like that. The basic thing is it needs to be competitively bid, following, the law that's applicable to you. We can't necessarily describe, obviously, because it's different sometimes for cities, and city are you following municipal code? Are you following what you have? Everybody's a little bit different.
Okay, but in this situation, anything over $10,000 would require a competitive bid process.
Yes.
Okay. And then we would utilize our city's same competitive bid process, but just knowing that it has to be, instead of a $25,000, which is our low limit right now for competitive bids, it would need to be lowered down to $10,000.
Down to 10, yes.
Okay.
And when we talk about sole source in there, one of the allowances for sole source is the cost to do it. So sometimes it's cost prohibitive to do a competitive procurement for something that's 10 grand. Like if you're in between the 10 and the 20 or 25, there's an allowance in there. We would just want to document it and know. Okay,
great. Where is that detailed somewhere? Is that in the grant agreement?
The 10,000 or the sole source piece?
The sole source.
Sole source isn't specifically talked about it, but I'm happy to talk with you offline and I can share, here's what that looks like.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Jenny.
And I was going to add just a note on that prior question about scope change. If you're going to change your scope in any way, it has to go to a policy advisory committee. So it's not easy necessarily, and they're going to scrutinize. We very rarely change scopes. What might actually end up happening is you might change your cost between your line items, and you'll see there's language in the grant agreement that talks about that. There's two different, depending on what you're changing and how you're changing and how it impacts the overall project. You can do different things with them. Some require policy advisory committee, some do not. So just caution you on when we talk about scope change, yeah, you can ask, but there is a process to do it because we need to be very careful about what was competitive, through the call for projects and not shifting a project now.
Thank you, Jenny. Marcus, I just gave you permissions to speak.
Yeah, hi. I had a question. If the grantee identified like a primary contractor and a subcontractor in their grant, do they still need to do sole source? And then I have a follow-up for that.
You do if you didn't compete it, yes. It doesn't mean you have to compete it today. Sometimes folks have done a procurement way back when, or, 6 months prior or something, there needs to be a competitive process to get to them. So if it was never competitively procured, then yeah, you're talking about a sole source.
Okay, and if there's one, let's say prime sub identified, does that include the sub to that prime contractor?
We don't watch the sub. We're talking about prime. So whoever you contract with, we're not going to keep going down the layers of them because it's all connected together.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any other raised hands, but we'll give a few more minutes because we threw a lot at you.
We have a new hand, I believe.
Sarah, I believe I just gave you permissions.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to follow up on the same line of questioning since there's time here. We're subcontracting out a very specific type of project. We're subcontracting out someone building a bat hotel, and there aren't a lot of people who specialize in that. Who will do that. So I'm not sure how we go about, it was a lot of work just to find this one person. So how do we go about dealing with that? The other subcontractor is a bat biologist who's very local and specialized. So how do we handle those?
They're just documented through the sole source.
Okay.
So it sounds like a bunch of you are asking questions about it. Maybe what I'll do is I'll get that form over to Lawrence. You can kind of see what the allowances are. There are things in there about very specialized things like building a bat box or bat biologist and knowing that, yes.
Okay.
So
great.
I'll get that to her and hopefully that helps with some of these, but absolutely keep asking those questions. I know they're unique.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And as a reminder, this will be recorded and allowable, and you will be able to, see it or share it to any of your subs if necessary, as well as all the material presented today will be supplied to you eventually, either after we get board approval or following soon. So just to let you all know that.
We'll give a few more minutes. Any burning questions about invoicing, reporting, monitoring?
And again, I will reiterate that please do not change any of the templates that were made. Courtney worked really hard on them, and they are amazing for tracking and making sure that, you all are on track. I think it's really helpful and very detailed. But if you have any questions when you do see them, please reach out to me and Courtney if you have any specific questions about anything.
We'll give it to 3:10. I don't see any more questions. For a few reminders, since we have a few more minutes, as Sarah McCutcheon had mentioned, you need to make a project page in order to receive your first invoice reimbursement. But then also that project page needs to be maintained, updated with the quarterly reports. Of course, if there was no billing or work performed in said quarter, there's nothing to upload other than just notifying Lauren, no billing.
Oh my God. Whew.
Okay. Otherwise,
Well, I think that's it for today. Thank you all so much for coming and listening after all these presentations and a technical difficulty. So we'll end the meeting and thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. You want to hit, and record?